Hello, everyone. My name is Cyndy McDonald. I am the hostess of this blog and podcast, and I love interviewing people who are subject matter experts in the field of education, business, and just society. And today I'm so pleased to have with me a really good friend and colleague, Peter VanBuskirk. Hi, Peter.
Oh, Cindy, good to see you.
Good to have you here.
Thank you.
So Peter has been an author, you're a speaker, you're nationally renowned. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and how did you get into higher education in the first place?
How much time do you have? Uh, well, I'll try to keep my story short, but when you said, how did I get into higher education in the first place, that's sort of an ironic little twist. When I was 17, 18 years old, I knew I was going to be a lawyer. No, I was going to be a judge. So I went off to college intent on doing whatever I needed to do to become a judge in the world. But I was at a liberal arts college, which, as you know, would challenge the way you think about things, challenge assumptions. And by the time I was in the middle of my sophomore year, the whole idea of law and becoming a judge went poof. I couldn't justify it any longer, which is kind of scary to be in college and suddenly become directionless. But I was fortunate during my undergraduate experience to be able to work as a tour guide in the admission office. Funny how these things get started. And during the summer before my senior year, this is at Bucknell University, I had worked in the admission office as an intern. So I was the tour guide for an admission office that sent out 5 tours a day, 5 days a week. And when there weren't enough tours for the whole day, I was assigned the task of collating the data from the attitude and opinion surveys that the university had sent out. You know, at the end of the cycle, everybody, the admission office wants to know, of the students who were admitted, why did you choose to come? Or if you didn't come, why did you not choose to come? So this became my job for a summer, and this was before computers. So I was doing this on legal pads, chicken scratch on legal pads. Now, the connection to my interest in law is this. I thought, starting college, that sociology would be a good degree for me to prepare for law. Well, when the law thing went poof, sociology stayed put, and I ended up taking a number of courses in demographics, which I could not have imagined at the time, but that's sort of an academic forerunner for marketing. So these pieces were kind of conspiring in my life, unbeknownst to me, the tour guiding, the internship, the demographics, such that by the time I'm ready to graduate from Bucknell, I'm thinking, maybe there's something for me to do in college admission. So right out of college, I was fortunate to be hired at Juniata College, liberal arts college in Pennsylvania, with 2 jobs. I was the assistant to the director of public relations doing sports information for them, and I was also an admission counselor. So it was an interesting year trying to do both things, and I learned a great deal in both places. I love the sports, and I thought I knew how to write, but I happened to be working for a guy who was one of the best writers I've ever encountered. So I learned how to write during that first year. But at that time, Juniata, and this is in the late 70s, 1970s, Juniata was going through a tough period where they'd hired a consultant to help with enrollment management. And these were the days before anybody would deign to admit that they had a consultant, because that's the kiss of death. So I was learning about prospect management and all things marketing as they related to higher education before most of the world knew that was possible. I was at Juniata for a couple of years, had a very successful experience, and then a position opened at Franklin and Marshall in 1980, and I joined the staff there and was fortunate over almost 25 years to have incremental opportunities to advance through the admission staff. I became the director, then the dean, the associate VP for enrollment management. And for a year and a half, they asked me to be the athletic director too. So
Let's just add that to your hat, right?
It was an interesting ride. It's kind of funny because I had great relationships with the athletic department and the coaches and the recruitment process, because I really wanted to help them be successful. And from the vantage point of admission, we helped each other. But when I became their boss, suddenly they didn't like me so much. So it was a good learning experience for me. But that's how I got into it. And I really enjoyed the strategic element of not only college admission, but the emerging discipline of enrollment management. The notion that institutions are very intentional about not only the way they enroll students, but the way they retain them, the kind of programmatic and staffing efforts that are involved with maintaining a certain number of students with a certain financial profile so that the institution can remain viable. My last 4 years at the college, I worked in the provost office, where I was the executive officer to the office of the provost, which wasn't something I necessarily was looking for, but when I found it, I thought, aha, now I get it, because I was in a position where I was controlling the budget, frankly, for all of the academic parts of the institution, including the fact, not salaries necessarily for faculty, but a lot of other elements of faculty life and academic life. But I got to see the interplay between the revenue generating parts of the institution and then the parts of the institution that need the revenue to be able to function in an appropriate way. So that was pretty cool for me. Along the way, though, I became concerned that the process was kind of becoming corrupted. And I don't mean at a particular school, I mean in general. And I would throw a lot of this, Ben, I think we'll be talking about this later on rankings. And I'll never forget this, when rankings came out, there was this first reaction on the part of colleges and universities, it'll go away, you can't rank colleges, just let the public know that we aren't worried about those things. Yet when the first magazine came out, I remember a staff meeting, we were in a conference room, everybody had a copy of U.S. News and World Report, and we opened it up to see where Franklin and Marshall was, National Liberal Arts College, 27th out of 150. And immediately the conversation around the room started to sound like, well, is that good or is that bad? To be in the top quartile of the National Liberal Arts College, the spin began. And so we're kind of excitedly thinking about how this was a good thing. And then the boss is sitting in the corner saying, you know what, let's take a look at that list again. And I'll never forget these words. She said, look at numbers 11, 12, 14, 17, 19, and 21. She identified them by name.
Wow.
She said, they are clearly inferior institutions, inferior to us. And she looked cautiously around the room. She said, how could that happen? Like, we should know. Mm-hmm. And then she kept looking around the room and she said, what are you going to do to make sure it doesn't happen again? In other words, heaven forbid that we become lower than 27. We need to certainly get above those that are inferior. That changed the world for us. We were no longer gatekeepers. We were no longer just recruiting and selecting kids. We were strategic enrollment managers. And that, I'll be honest with you, Cyndy, I was good at it. I didn't like it, though. I didn't like what it was doing to the relationship between students and colleges. I didn't like what it was doing to the way students and parents thought about themselves in the process. And so I began to look at different ways. I was often invited to speak to high school groups about the college going process. And there's a lot of talking head stuff that I found just absolutely meaningless. So I tried to develop some programs that would get people to think critically about themselves in the process. And that's eventually how I began to spin out of the institutional orbit. And by 2005, I was starting to do things on my own with Best College Fit. Long story, sorry about that.
Oh, no. I think it's fascinating. So basically you've seen strategic enrollment management from the very beginning. Mm-hmm. So you've seen that trend. Can you give like a definition? What is, many people have never heard that term. I know a lot of times in my classes, people think, oh, well, colleges are just, recruiting students and admitting students. And, if you have the right credentials, then you get in. I know a lot of international students look at it in that way, and rankings, we'll talk about that again too. But what is strategic enrollment management?
Well, I don't know if I have a textbook definition, but strategic enrollment management acknowledges that there are several goals that you need to arrive at, and not accidentally. I mean, when we were gatekeepers, we admitted the class, and then we took a step back and said, oh, how good this is. We have these kids from this state and that state, et cetera. And that's just wonderful. Well, strategic enrollment management means that you are intentional about what you're trying to accomplish. The very first point of intentionality is financial. And regardless of what institutions say, regardless of institutions that claim to be need blind, they're not. They need to make sure that at the end of the day, the students they enroll are generating sufficient revenue to pay the bills. Plain and simple. It's a business. And if they don't have enough revenue to pay the bills, they got a problem. So that's one part. Part two, strategic enrollment management encompasses all of the students who are enrolled. So not only are people like me concerned about bringing students in and bringing in a net revenue per student, but we're also mindful of retaining students, because if we only retain half the students we bring in, we're creating a bigger challenge for ourselves at the point of entry. So the more we can retain, the more selective we can be, and the more judgment we can exercise in terms of whom we admit and for what reasons, et cetera. When we have no selectivity, we have to take whoever we can. When we have greater selectivity, we can be more intentional about putting that class together. So we're looking at the whole enrollment when we talk about strategic enrollment management. We're talking about retention. And then strategic enrollment management means that within the class, there will be specific types of goals. Within the financial objectives, there are specific types of goals. Colleges want to have presumably the brightest kids. Well, how do you measure that? And again, that's where rankings corrupt the process, I believe, because they've introduced particularly testing as a proxy for quality, and that's just not a good idea. They've introduced selectivity as a proxy for quality, and that's not a good idea either. But colleges are falling all over themselves trying to figure out how can we get the best class. Why? Well, there are families who are putting together a list of colleges. Why do you have that college on your list? It's a great college. It's one of the best. And what's happening, and this is what bothers me, Cyndy, is that kids are not stopping to think about what's best for them. They're just reacting to a name. They're reacting to something that's out there in the public reputationally. So strategic enrollment management means that rather than taking what you get as an institution, that you're trying to be targeted about using your resources to leverage the outcomes that you want. And colleges are pretty intentional about that. I mean, let's boil it down to the micro. In terms of entering students, it means that rather than just admitting all students in a regular admission process, we have an early decision process. Well, why might that be helpful to an institution? Think about it. If you're going to enroll one student early decision, how many do you have to accept to enroll one? You accept one to get one because it's a high yield proposition. Conversely, in regular decision, most schools have to admit at least 5 to get one. So the more 1-for-1s we get, the fewer 5-for-1s we need. So if we can increase by a factor of 50 the number of early decision kids we have this year, that means we've reduced by 250 the number of regular decision kids we need to admit. So this is, again, the strategic stuff that people don't see or hear. And the other piece that is coming into play nowadays is the wait list. And I'm not going to get into the weeds on how the wait list operates, but colleges and universities know they can manage a wait list at a very high yield also. It's not a 1-for-1 yield, but it's often a 4-for-3 yield. You admit 4 to get 3, which is pretty good, especially against a 5 to get 1. So if you can admit kids at a 75% yield rate from the wait list versus 20% from regular decision, where do you want to take them?
Right.
So increasingly, schools that are trying to kind of go up the ladder, become more selective, are putting very well qualified kids, kids they would have admitted 5 years ago without thinking about, putting them on the wait list with this thought in mind. Well, let's see if they're really interested. If they're really interested, we can take them later at a higher yield. And this is sort of a back-end early decision. It's a way that colleges have to build their enrollments while looking like they're becoming more selective. So I know how this works, and that's a big part of what I talk about. I just want families to understand what they're getting into. And whenever I have this conversation, I get this wide-eyed look like, wow, can they really do that? Well, yeah, they can. You're an object to them. You're not a person. You're an object, and you need to understand that. Oh.
Right. And it's not an altruistic type of approach, because as you said, they're a business. They need to keep their doors open. They're not serving anybody if they don't keep the doors open. And we're going to see a lot more of that right now after the whole economic impact from COVID-19. And
well, COVID-19 and besides COVID-19, we're seeing a demographic decline. Also, the number of college-age kids is diminishing, not at the same rate it did in the 1980s. In the 1980s, there was a 25% decline over a period of about 15 years in the number of college-age kids. That was pretty precipitous. But nonetheless, there's still a decline in the number of college-age kids on the horizon right now. So colleges that are on the periphery, those that are kind of struggling to stay open, many of them are not going to make it. And the COVID-19 situation just is pushing them to the edge of the cliff.
Yeah. So talk a little bit more about the U.S. News and World Report rankings and how that, so you've talked about how it began and what an influence it has. Where have you seen it go since then? And the direction. Do you like the direction things are going?
I must confess, Cyndy, that I am not in favor of rankings. I think that rankings greatly distort, if not corrupt, the process. They take the focus off of fit and finding synergy between the student and the place. Mm-hmm. And for many families, they create the expectation that there are certain places that are good and I need to go there. I mean, how often do you have a conversation with the student and you're talking about the student's list? And they'll say, well, where did you come up with these schools on this list? U.S. News and World Report. Well, that's interesting. So tell me about what College A. Why are you interested in College A? Well, it's a highly renowned school. It's a ranked school. It's an Ivy League school. What about College B? Same thing. So why do you want to go to Harvard? It's ranked number one. No, why do you want to go to Harvard? It's a great school. No, why do you want to go to Harvard? It's an Ivy League school. No, why do you want to go to Harvard? Silence. And the point here is that not that Harvard's a bad place, not that people shouldn't want to go to Harvard, but rankings have encouraged students and parents to stop thinking about what makes sense to the kid. And I find that what I'm trying to do these days is focus on intentionality and students approaching this process with a sense of purpose. And rankings just destroy that sense of purpose. Rankings were born out of a time when consumer perspectives were important. Consumer guides. I don't know if you ever had consumer guides at your house. We didn't buy anything without consulting consumer guides. Well, in the early 1980s, the college-going market was becoming a buyer's market. And U.S. News and World Report literally was on the edge of gone under. So they threw a flyer out on this notion that let's be the consumer guide for colleges. And son of a gun, they're still doing it almost 40 years later. The interesting thing is they pass off to the world as science something that is fiction. They make up the rankings. They collect data. Oh, sure, they collect data. They've got formulas. But at the end of the day, the final justification for a ranking is an editorial justification, not a data justification. And here's why. For the nearly 40 years that U.S. News and World Report has existed, Bob Morse, who's the editor who oversees the rankings, has admitted in public settings that they want to hear feedback. They want to hear what people have to say so that they can go back and re-engineer this process and make it better. He has conceded that in the 37 years of rankings, they've never had the same formula 2 years in a row.
Wow.
Now think about that. If the formula is static, rankings go away. It's only when they change that people remain curious. to see who's moving up and who's moving down, et cetera. So US News manipulates the rankings by manipulating the formula, and with all of the best intentions. But it's what keeps the public hooked. So again, I'm very cynical about rankings. I'm very cynical about the role now that US News and World Report presumes to play in the college-going process. I mean, you can look at your CSS feed any day and find that there's a half a dozen US News and World Report articles about the college-going process, and they're not generally not submitted by people who have an awful lot of expertise in the process, but they're writers who take information from the public domain and reform it into their own articles. And U.S. News has really recreated itself into an animal that I personally don't find particularly attractive.
So how do you have a particular way of framing how students should evaluate colleges? How do they find that synergy between them and the college? What do you recommend?
Wow, a couple of things. One, I think I'm going to talk about student-centeredness, and I'm going to talk about fit.
Okay.
The reason I talk about student-centeredness first has to do with that sense of intentionality. It has to do with a family, a student, parents approaching the conversation not with a list in mind, but with the student in mind. So the very fundamental question that needs to be asked of the student with an expected answer is, why do you want to go to college? Now, the answer might change from conversation to conversation, but the student has to start thinking about this. Why do you want to go to college? You don't have to. You can work, you can travel, you can do volunteer things. You can hang out at home and play video games all day, but you don't have to go to college. So why would you do this? And you'd be amazed at the number. You probably asked the same question, but you'd be amazed at the number of kids who kind of give you that deer in the headlight look, like, do I really need to know? Well, doesn't everybody go to college? If I don't go to college, I'm going to be left behind. No, not everybody goes to college. And even if they did, is that really a good answer for you? Oh, you don't know my parents. They're going to make me go. I don't have a choice in the matter. And when I'm with a group, I'll ask students, how many of you have parents going to make you to go to college? About a third of the students put their hands up somewhat sheepishly. Parents are looking around, my kid? Oh, yeah. How's that working for you? You're going to go to college because somebody says you're going to go, or because you want to go? And what I want them to understand is that in life, whether you're a student or a parent, whoever you are, you'd much rather do things by choice than by mandate. So why would you choose to go to college? This is the beginning of ownership. And when the student can feel some sense of ownership born out of a sense of purpose, then this process starts to become productive for the student. So why do you want to go to college? And once we can establish that purpose, I like to talk about fit. I believe there are 5 elements of a good college fit. And they're probably 10, they're probably 20, but I think most of the elements that we can imagine would fall under the 5 I'm going to describe to you. The best college is going to be a place that provides a program of study that meets your needs. Voila, makes sense. You want to be a teacher, you find a teacher education program. You want to be an engineer, you find an engineering program. You'd be amazed at the number of kids who just don't quite know yet, or they're in an absolute panic because they wonder, how can you expect me to look at a college if I don't know what I want to do? And what we need to do is remind them that that's okay. If you're 17 or 18 years old and you don't know what you want to do, you're normal. And that 2/3 of college students will change their mind about their majors at least once, half of them twice. But what I also need to remind them is that there are many colleges and universities that have curricula designed to accommodate them. Liberal arts colleges, general studies programs. So the point I make to students on this element of fit is this: find places that offer what you need. The mistake many students will make is that they'll apply to a university. University says, tell us now, what is your major? We need to know now. And there are a lot of university applications that do that. Student goes to mom and dad and says, well, what should I put here? I don't know what I want to do. My response, why are you applying to that school? You're certainly not applying to that place because it's meeting your need. There may be other reasons why, but
Right.
It's not a good fit. Number
Mhm.
two, and this is one that I think is really important, the best college is going to be a place that provides a style of instruction consistent with the way you like to learn. Kids miss this completely. They just assume that courses are courses and colleges are colleges and it's all the same. You just go to some college and you take these courses. They're not all the same. So some little exercises you can do with kids to help bring this home to them. For example, you say to the student, if you're going to learn biology, would you rather learn biology from the book, read all about it, or in the lab? If you're going to learn history, would you rather learn history in the lecture room with a couple hundred students listening to the professor talk about the book that you all just read, or in a seminar room with 15 to 18 students and the professor leads a discussion about the same book? Same book, but a different approach. And when I start to talk about it this way, kids say, oh, yeah, okay, I'd rather be in the seminar room, or I'd rather be in the lab, or I'd rather be in the lecture hall because I don't want to be front and center with the conversation. And that's okay. There are lots of different learning styles, just as there are different instructional styles. And what we need to do is make sure that kids understand that. One of my favorite exercises is this. If you could ask a student, if you could have the opportunity to get a grade for the whole year in any discipline, and the teacher said, here are your assessment options to get a grade for the whole year. You can take a test, covers material for the whole year. You can write a 20-page paper, or you can do an independent project. What would you choose to do? Some students will say, I want to do a test. Why? Well, I'm good at it. I can manage the material. I can prepare. I can do the test. Some students will say, I want to write a paper. Why? I like to write. I like to organize my thoughts. I like to make arguments, etc. And then a lot of students are going to say, I want to do the paper or the project. Now, some of them are going to say, I want to do a project because I don't like tests and I'm not good at papers. But other students will say, it's a creative opportunity for me. It's an opportunity for me to insert other parts of my perspective into what I've learned. My response then to the students is, especially if I'm doing this one-on-one with kids, if I look at the list of colleges and the list of colleges they've identified include places that are 15, 20, 20,000, 25,000 students, I'll say, guess what you're never going to do at those institutions? You're never going to do a project. You'll do a lot of tests, fill in the bubble test, which you just told me you don't like to do, or you're not good at it, and you might do some papers. Oh, maybe I should look at smaller schools. The point that I'm trying to make here, Cyndy, is I don't care where kids go to school.
Right.
But it's important for them to understand that the choices they make can put them in situations where they can be more or less successful. When you consider that barely half of the students who start college finish, it says to me that they're not making good decisions about where they put themselves. It's not that they can't be good college students, but if you're a fill in the bubble kind of kid and you would rather do tests and you put yourself in an environment where you're constantly front and center with discussions and hands-on and it just doesn't feel right to you, you're probably not going to like it and you're probably not going to stay.
Right.
So find a place that provides a style of instruction consistent with the way you like to learn. Number three, find a place that will provide a level of challenge that's commensurate with your ability and preparation. As you do through high school, you step up each year. You find a new challenge each year. Your first year of college should not be the same as your last year of high school. You want to step up. Mm-hmm. Now, the problem with some students is they want to take a leap up. And if they manage to get into a place that represents that leap, they're going to spend 4 years trying to prove they belong rather than doing their best work. And of course, some students will just take a big step down from what they did in high school. And of course, the life of the mind probably isn't first thing in their mind right at that point. They want to have a good time. But my point to them is after about 2 or 3 semesters, your brain's going to rebel. Your brain's going to say, hey, what about me? I can do this. You put me here. And now you go home and you talk to your parents about transferring. So you want to find places that are going to provide the right level of challenge. My advice to kids is this: talk to your teachers, because there's nobody better than your teachers to help you understand what your capacity for growth is. And they can help project you into certain kinds of environments. Number 4, the best college is a place that provides a sense of community that feels like home. And it's interesting because elements of this typically come first to kids. I want to go to a big school. I want to go to a party school. I want to go to an ESPN school. They're always on television. I want to be in the stadium with 100,000 kids. Well, yeah, you want stuff like that. But when I talk about feeling like home, I'm talking more about being in a place where you'll be valued for who you are. You don't have to put on airs. You don't have to dress up in a certain way. You don't have to act or talk in a certain way. You'll be with people who have shared values and interests, people who will lift you up, people who will celebrate with you on the good days and will support you on the bad days, people who will make you become a better person. And I think this sense of community is something that needs to be better understood by kids. And while I'm on this, just a quick note, I find that quite often I need to remind kids of the hierarchy of importance as they look at different colleges and the variables associated with college searching. They'll say, I want to go to a big school. Why? Well, there are more people there and I can do more things. Well, okay, is that essential to you? Mm-hmm. Very important, or would be nice? Oh, it'd be nice. Well, let's think about what are some of the essentials. Is it essential that you can be exposed to a high level of instruction? Yeah. And when it comes right down to it, they begin to acknowledge that the essentials are the educational pieces, and the would-be nices are the kind of the frills. And the point is, you don't want the would-be nices to drive the decision.
Right.
Finally, the best college is a place that values you for what you have to offer. And this underlies everything. It's a place that wants you, seeing what you've done over 4 years, knows your trajectory into the future. They want you. They will accept you. They'll give you the financial assistance you need. They will demonstrate how they will invest in your success. And when you think about this as a parent, as an educator, this should be your objective. You want your child to be in a situation where that institution cares and will do whatever it takes within reason to help your child find success. That's a good fit.
That shifts the whole perspective of what is the ranking, or is this college, labeled, and focuses it back onto the student and the student experience. So how do we help parents, as advisors, this is, like we're preaching to the choir here, right? But how do we help parents and especially a lot of times first generation parents who didn't experience the American education system, or international students also, sometimes they think these rankings are from the government, so they think they're very official. So do you have any thoughts or ideas or tools advisors can use to help communicate this?
Well, you've identified different types of parents along the way here. The parents who are most problematic are the parents who have been working on this for 16 years. And now they have a child who's ready to look at colleges, and the child is supposed to take the baton and understand everything that's been going on. And I find, and I'm sure you see this as well, I find it interesting sometimes to meet a student and I start to ask the student questions, and the student turns to mom or dad and says, what should I say? Or what have we done here? Well, my mom's done the research. And in front of the parent, I'll say to the student, no, this is your job now. Mm-hmm. And your mom isn't going to go to college. She can't answer for you. You need to answer for yourself. And sometimes that's kind of jarring for the parent to hear.
Yep.
But I just think it's important. The college process should be a partnership between students and parents. And it's a partnership with roles that need to be defined all over again, because as young people grow up, the child-parent relationship is defined in a traditional way, where parents are the caregivers and the children, take their guidance from the parents. Well, now the children are becoming adults, and they need to learn how to make adult decisions. And parents are uncomfortable with that a lot of times, especially if they have preconceived notions about which is best, etc. So I try to separate parents from the conversation. Mm-hmm. And the parents that are open to that typically find that their kids do really well. The parents struggle sometimes with that separation initially.
Yep.
As an advisor, you need to find the right ways to keep them informed of what's going on. But Cyndy,
give them a job or give them a role that's not interfering, but still helps them feel like they're engaged.
But one of the things that I found that has been very helpful when you talk about tools is in terms of demystifying the process or demything it, is to kind of literally diagram what's going on at a college and a university. And here's what I'll do, and I hope this is not too granular. I'll say, imagine you are an academic person and you've been committed to mastering your discipline. You've just gotten a PhD. Mm-hmm. And now what you want to do is get a job as a professor. So you apply for jobs, you get a job at a university. Maybe it's a flagship public university, maybe it's an Ivy League university, at the university. Do you know the kind of jobs, and I'll ask families, the kind of jobs that people want to get are tenured positions? You know what tenure is? No. Well, tenure is a contract for life. Oh, that'd be pretty good. Professors love tenure. Would you know what you need to do to get tenure? No. Well, you typically are hired into a position where you have 6 years to prove yourself to the institution, 6 or 7. And do you know what you need to do to prove yourself to the institution? No. Well, there are 3 elements. And this is what I learned in the provost office. The least of the 3 is that you need to get good reviews from the students. And I say the least of the 3 because in most college campuses, when people don't get tenure, the students are in an uproar because they love those professors and they can't understand why the professors didn't. That's the least of the criteria. Second, you need to show that you're involved in the community as an advisor, a member of committees, etc. But the number 1 criterion for tenure is scholarship, demonstrating that you've been contributing to the body of new knowledge in your discipline. Oh, so now you're this PhD, just got a job at a university, and you want a contract for life. At a university, you have access to different levels of instruction, PhD, graduate, and undergraduate. At which level do you think you'd be inclined to want to associate? Well, the logical assumption is you want to be with the highest level achievers, the PhD. Well, of course. So, that's where you are. You're going to be doing some instruction at the undergraduate level, but by and large, your primary focus is getting this research done. So if you're going to do research, who are you going to have help you with your research? Because you might have a grant for $250,000 to do research. Who's going to help you? PhD students, graduate students, oh no, it'll be the PhDs. You're right. So you've got a lot of people with advanced degrees whose primary focus is scholarship and working at the highest level of the institution, such that the level of instruction that trickles down to the undergraduate is not going to be all that it's necessarily cracked up to be. Conversely, let's take that person who just got the PhD and they get a job at a liberal arts college, not a university, but a college. Similar tenure expectations, similar research expectations. You have a $250,000 grant to do research at that college. Who's going to help you?
And graduate students.
Undergraduates. And if you're at all concerned about advancing your academic career to the graduate or PhD level, your success as an applicant at that level is going to rest on your ability to show that you've engaged in the work. You're not just book smart. You don't just have a GPA, but you've done the stuff. So if you look at a university versus a college, frankly, you're going to have more opportunities to engage in the process of doing things at a college than you will at a university. Oh, didn't know that. And well-educated people in this country don't know that.
Right.
Okay. So I think trying to just diagram out what a college or university looks like and the kind of orientation to instruction that each offers makes a big difference sometimes in helping parents to kind of back off of the notion, well, she needs to go here and needs to go there. I don't know, it's worked for me. I don't know how.
It makes total sense, because then you're putting in an objective perspective that a lot of parents especially can understand and connect to, and it gives them something to think about. So, and it reflects back to that, why are you having your child go to college, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I like the way you frame that. Why are you having your child go to college, rather than why does your child want to go to college? Mm-hmm. It's about purpose and intentionality. And if we can get our kids to begin to think about and articulate that sense of purpose, Then the articulation of a college list becomes an outgrowth of that. I've chosen these colleges because I have found evidence that I can meet my purpose on that campus. And you know that in the admission process, particularly at very selective schools, the kids who are admitted are the ones who can demonstrate that purpose better than the rest. If you are a top in the class student with high SATs and you're applying to a very, very, very selective school with the expectation you're going to get in simply because you're good, you're wrong. Because that institution wants to see evidence that you've been thoughtful about who you are, what you want to do, how you want to do it, and why you've chosen that place.
Yeah, yeah. And then that opens the door for a lot of other discussions that maybe we could have in the future. It was like, how do you do that? You know, the school visits and demonstrated interest, and like you said, wait lists. So, you know, that's why there's so much revolving around this. But it still comes back to the core things that you talked about and those 5 things. So if someone wants to get a hold of you, Peter, how do they do that?
Well, I'm still doing some speaking at schools this year. I'm going to be doing some virtual presentations as well as in-person presentations. I do a very limited amount of private work with individual clients. That's not advertised, but you know, I'm happy to see them. And I'm also just happy to talk to colleagues and answer questions that might come up. The best way to catch me is at my email address, which is peter@bestcollegefit.com. peter@bestcollegefit.com. I live on my email, and if I am able to receive an email from you or from anyone you've referred to me, I typically respond within 24 hours. And in terms of presentations for schools and other groups, if you invite me and my calendar's open, we can make something work.
That sounds great. That sounds great. And is your book still available, Peter?
The first book I wrote, Winning the College Admission Game Strategies for Students and Parents, is not in print at this time. The other book, the Prepare, Compete, Win, the Ultimate College Planning Workbook for Students, is actually in its 5th edition, and I do have copies of that. It's not available anywhere but at Peter. So shoot me an email if you'd like a book or you'd like a bunch of books to give to your clients. That'd be fine.
Yes, and I've used it. I think it's excellent. It has great exercise and opportunities to really work through all the things that you've talked about. So thank you so much for your time today. It's always a delight to talk to you. I always learn so much, and I know that others will benefit from this as well.
You're kind to say so. It's always a pleasure to work with you, Cyndy, and to support your work. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.